Have you ever wondered why you can want peace, love, and success, but somehow keep ending up in the same emotional place, with the same kind of problems, the same kind of people, and the same inner exhaustion? You tell yourself, this time will be different, but then the old pattern returns. You start overthinking again. You start doubting yourself again. You go back to the same comfortable habits, the same emotional reactions, the same familiar pain. And the worst part is, a part of you already knows what you should do, but something deeper keeps pulling you back. That's because the life you consciously want may feel unsafe to the part of you that learned how to survive the old one. Today, we're uncovering why your subconscious rejects the life you say you want, why familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace, and how to stop mistaking repetition for destiny. Let's begin. Most people think change fails because they're not disciplined enough. They think they need more motivation, more willpower, more routines, more intensity. So they try harder. They make new promises to themselves. This time, I'm going to be different. This time, I'm going to stop attracting the same kind of people. This time, I'm going to build the life I actually want. And for a little while, it works. You feel inspired. You feel focused. You feel like you have finally turned a corner. But then something strange happens. The old emotional gravity pulls you back. You fall into the same reactions. You answer the same kind of messages. You tolerate the same kind of disrespect. You procrastinate on the same dream. You go back to the same comfortable habits, the same self-doubt, the same inner heaviness. And then the mind says, "See, you haven't changed at all." But that's not the whole truth. Because very often, what looks like self-sabotage on the surface is actually self-protection underneath. Your subconscious is not trying to ruin your life. It's trying to keep you safe according to what it already knows. And this is where the whole pattern begins. Because the subconscious does not choose what is best for you. It chooses what's familiar. And those two things aren't always the same thing. Your conscious mind wants change, but your subconscious mind wants survival. Your conscious mind says, "I want to be loved." Your subconscious asks, "Does love even feel safe?" Your conscious mind says, "I want to be successful." Your subconscious asks, "Will success make people judge me?" Your conscious mind says, "I want a peaceful life." Your subconscious asks, "Do I even know who I am without chaos?" That's the hidden conflict. You're not just fighting laziness. You're not just fighting fear. You're not just fighting bad habits. You're fighting an old internal map of safety. If you grew up around instability, your nervous system may have learned that chaos is normal. If you had to earn love, your subconscious may believe peace is suspicious because love always came with tension. If you were criticized when you tried to shine, part of you may associate success with danger. If you were abandoned after opening your heart, part of you may associate intimacy with loss. So now, when a better life starts to appear, you may not feel relief. You may feel resistance. Not because the new life is wrong, but because the new life is unfamiliar. And to the subconscious, unfamiliar can feel unsafe. This is why people often return to what hurts them. Not because they love pain, but because familiar pain can feel safer than the unknown peace. That's the brutal truth. The life you say you want may require an identity your subconscious has not learned how to trust yet. You want peace, but peace feels empty because your system is used to noise. You want love, but healthy love feels boring because your system is used to chasing. You want success, but success feels threatening because your system is used to hiding. You want freedom, but freedom feels terrifying because part of you has built an entire identity around surviving limitation. So when the doorway opens, part of you walks forward, but another part pulls you back. And then you call that failure. But it's not failure. It's an old pattern asking to be seen. This is why the subconscious is a mirror. It does not only show you what you desire, it shows you what you still believe is safe. And that's uncomfortable, because it means your repeated patterns are not random. The same relationship pattern, the same financial ceiling, the same emotional exhaustion, they're all showing you something. Not as punishment, but as information. Your life is not mocking you. It's revealing the internal agreement you keep living from. Somewhere inside, a part of you may still believe, I have to struggle to be worthy. I have to overgive to be loved. I have to stay small to be accepted. I have to expect disappointment so it hurts less when it comes. I have to control everything because safety cannot be trusted. And until those agreements are seen clearly, the outer life keeps reorganizing itself around them. But this is where real change begins. Not with hatred toward yourself, not with forcing yourself into a new identity overnight, and not with spiritual bypassing, where you pretend the wound is gone because you said the right affirmation. Real change begins when awareness enters the pattern without shame, because shame keeps the pattern hidden. Awareness brings it into the light. And when awareness enters the subconscious, the deeper self begins to return to the throne. The part of you connected to Source, not as a distant power outside of you, but as the still intelligence beneath your fear, beneath your story, beneath the old programming. Source doesn't force transformation. Source reveals what is no longer true. And once you see the pattern clearly, you no longer have to obey it blindly. So how do you actually begin the shift? Well, you don't start by attacking the subconscious. You start by listening to it. When you feel yourself falling into old patterns, pause and ask yourself, what does this familiar pattern give me? Does it give me control? Does it give me emotional certainty? Does it help me avoid rejection? Does it let me stay hidden? Does it protect me from the unknown? Because every pattern has a hidden payoff, even painful patterns. The relationship you keep returning to may give you the comfort of predictability. The dream you keep delaying may protect you from the fear of being judged. The chaos you keep recreating may protect you from the emptiness you feel when things are finally quiet. The identity you keep wearing may protect you from discovering who you really are. This doesn't mean the pattern is good. It means the pattern once served a purpose. But what protected you in one season can imprison you in another. At some point, the survival strategy becomes the cage, and the life you say you want cannot enter until the part of you clinging to the cage understands that the door is open now. This is why healing has to be gentle and honest at the same time. You have to be gentle enough to understand why the pattern formed, but honest enough to stop worshiping it. You have to stop saying, "This is just who I am." No. This is who you became while trying to survive. And there is a deeper self beneath that. A self that does not need chaos to feel alive. A self that doesn't need struggle to feel worthy. A self that doesn't need to recreate the past in order to feel safe. That self is not something you invent. It's something you return to. The life you say you want is not being rejected because you're broken. It's being rejected because part of you still doesn't recognize it as safe. So the work is not to visualize a better life. The work is to become familiar with peace. To become familiar with being loved without chasing. To become familiar with success without fear. Because once the nervous system learns that the new life is not a threat, the subconscious stops fighting it. And then change no longer feels like pretending. It feels like remembering. You are not here to keep repeating the same life with different faces, different rooms, and different excuses. You are here to wake up inside the pattern, to see the old agreement, to release the false safety, and to let the deeper self lead you into the life your soul has been trying to choose all along. You keep saying you want a different life, but somehow, the same patterns keep finding you. The same emotional reactions, the same money problems, the same self-doubt. The same feeling that no matter how much you try to change, something underneath you keeps pulling you back into your old patterns. That something is not weakness. It's programming. Most people think their life keeps repeating because they are unlucky, broken, or cursed. So they force themselves into a new plan. And they say, "This time, I'm really going to change." And at first, it feels different. You wake up with motivation. You tell yourself you are done with living the old way. You start watching better content. Maybe you start to journal, or pray more, or perhaps you even begin to meditate. You try to become the person you know you are capable of becoming. But then life presses on the same old bruise. Someone disappoints you. An unexpected bill hits. A relationship triggers you, leaving you feeling ignored, rejected, and misunderstood. Then suddenly, the old self comes back, and you begin judging yourself, because from the surface it looks like you failed. But here's the truth. You didn't fail because you lacked the desire to change. You repeated the old pattern because your subconscious mind still believed the old way of life was safer than the new one. Most people overlook this. Your conscious mind may want peace, love, and healing. But your subconscious mind doesn't care about what sounds beautiful. It cares about what feels familiar. And for many people, familiarity has been confused with safety. If chaos is familiar, peace can feel suspicious. If emotional neglect is familiar, healthy love can feel boring or uncomfortable. If rejection is familiar, being truly seen can feel threatening. So when a new life begins to appear, the subconscious does not always celebrate. Oftentimes, it panics. Because in order to have a new life, you must create a new identity. But the old identity has survived by repeating the same emotional environment over and over again. What's actually happening isn't that life is against you. What's happening is that your nervous system, emotions, and assumptions are all working together to keep you inside a reality that matches what you already believe is true. Not what you say is true, but what you deeply assume to be true. And there's a difference. You can say, I deserve love, while secretly expecting abandonment. You can say, I am ready to succeed, while secretly expecting everything to fall apart. You can say, I am healed, while still reaching from the part of you that never felt safe. That's why affirmations alone don't always work. Because of the words say one thing, but the body believes another. The deeper belief usually wins. The subconscious mind is not moved by pretty phrases when your emotional system still lives the old story. It is moved by repetition, emotional intensity, and lived evidence. This is why childhood wounds become adult patterns. Not because the past is more powerful than you, but because the past taught your system what life is supposed to feel like. If you grew up walking on eggshells, you may become addicted to reading people's moods. If you grew up being criticized, you may hear judgment even when no one is attacking you. If you grew up feeling invisible, you may chase people who make you prove your worth. But here's the brutal truth. The subconscious mind will often choose a painful familiar pattern over a peaceful unfamiliar one. It's not because pain is good. It's because pain is known. And the unknown, even when it's better, can feel dangerous to a system built around survival. This is why people sabotage progress right when things start to improve. Or they finally find someone who truly loves them for who they are, and they start looking for problems. Or they finally begin to find peace, and their mind invents a crisis. From the outside, it looks irrational. But from the inside, the subconscious mind is saying, this doesn't match who we have been. This doesn't match what we know. This doesn't match the emotional climate we're used to surviving in. So it pulls you back into the old reaction, the old relationship dynamic, or the old fear. It pulls you back into the old version of yourself that may have been painful, but at least it felt predictable. But this is where real growth begins. You realize the pattern was once protection. The people-pleasing protected you from rejection, and the emotional walls protected you from being hurt again. But what once protected you can eventually imprison you. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, am I still being protected? Or am I just repeating a pattern created by fear? The way out is not to declare war on your subconscious mind. That only creates more inner conflict. The way out is to become conscious of what your subconscious mind has been trying to preserve. Because every repeating pattern is protected by an old belief. Behind overgiving may be the belief, I have to earn love. Behind emotional withdrawal may be the belief, if people get too close, they'll hurt me. Behind constant anxiety may be the belief, if I don't worry, something bad will happen. You don't break the pattern by being hard on yourself. You break it by seeing the belief underneath it. You start by responding differently in small moments. When you want to over-explain, pause. When you want to assume rejection, question the story of your perception. When you want to self-sabotage, slow down and ask yourself, what part of me feels unsafe with this new possibility? That question matters, because most people try to change behavior without listening to the fear underneath it. Your subconscious is not convinced by pressure. It's convinced by repeated safety. If love feels unfamiliar, practice receiving it without earning it. If success feels unfamiliar, practice allowing good things to come to you without immediately expecting punishment. If being seen feels unfamiliar, practice not shrinking the moment attention comes your way. This isn't glamorous work, but it's daily work. It happens in the moment you don't send the desperate text, or when you let someone love you without testing them, or perhaps when you stop calling chaos passion just because peace feels so strange. A new life is not created by new thoughts. It's created by new emotional repetitions. You have to become familiar with what used to feel foreign. Maybe it's peace, stability, and respect. Or perhaps it's being heard, being valued, and being safe in your own body. That's how the subconscious changes. Not through one dramatic breakthrough, but through repeated experiences that teach your system, we're safe now. We don't have to recreate the old world anymore. Patience is the key. You will see the pattern before you are fully free from it. That doesn't mean you're not changing. Awareness comes first. At first, you notice the old pattern after it happens. Then you notice it while it's happening. Then you notice it before it takes over. And eventually, you become someone who no longer needs the old pattern to feel safe. That's real transformation. Not pretending the past never affected you, you never get triggered, or that you are above human emotions. Real transformation begins when the past still echoes, but it's no longer in control. So, if your subconscious mind keeps recreating the same life, don't use that as proof you are doomed. Use it as evidence that something within you is asking to be seen. These are not random loops. They're messages from the deeper mind saying, this is where the old story still lives. And once you can see the story, you can stop worshiping it as truth. You can stop calling survival your personality. You can stop calling fear intuition. You can stop calling familiarity fate. Your life changes when the old pattern no longer feels like home. And that begins the moment you stop asking, why does this always happen to me? And start asking, what part of me believes this is all I am allowed to experience? That question opens the door. And once the door opens, the old life may still carry your name, but you don't have to answer anymore. What if the strongest cage wasn't built from visible bars, but from repeated patterns inside the mind that feel so familiar you mistake them for yourself? The ancient Gnostics spoke of archons as forces of distortion that kept the soul trapped in ignorance. But whether you read that literally, symbolically, or psychologically, the pattern remains the same. That pattern may be speaking through you, and until it's seen, the soul remains asleep inside a life it did not consciously choose. In the Gnostic vision, the soul does not fall asleep because it's weak. It falls asleep because it becomes surrounded by illusion. The divine spark enters the world of form, and slowly, layer by layer, it forgets its origin. It begins to identify with the body, the pain, and the system of thought it was born into. The soul enters a world of illusion and begins believing that this illusion is reality. The mind is given language before it is given wisdom. It is given fear before it is given understanding. It is given survival patterns before it is taught presence. And before the child can even question life, life has already installed 1,000 conclusions. You learn what love is from people who may not know how to love. You learn what safety is from environments that may not have been safe. You learn what God is from people who may have projected their fear onto the divine. And slowly, the mind forms a structure, a false architecture. This is where the archons begin their work. Not as cartoon villains floating in the sky, but as repeating forces of distortion within perception. Fear, shame, and control become the rulers of the mind. And each one tells the soul, stay asleep. Don't look beyond this. This is all there is. That is why false patterns are so powerful. They don't simply create behavior. They create reality tunnels. A person trapped in shame doesn't just feel shame. They interpret everything through shame. A person trapped in fear doesn't just feel fear. They scan life for proof that fear is justified. A person trapped in abandonment doesn't just remember abandonment. They expect it. They prepare for it. And sometimes they recreate it before it can surprise them. This is how the soul falls asleep. The light isn't gone, but the lens has been darkened. A false pattern survives by convincing you that it's protecting you. Fear says, I am keeping you safe. Control says, I am keeping your life from falling apart. Shame says, I am making sure you know who you really are. But look closely. The thing claiming to protect you can also imprison you. How often has control blocked the peace you so desperately chase? How often has shame kept you small while pretending to keep you humble? The archonic pattern always has a counterfeit virtue. It doesn't usually appear as obvious darkness. It appears as logic. It appears as being realistic. It appears as, I'm just trying to not get hurt. And that's why people defend their chains. Because the chain has been rebranded as wisdom. But spiritual awakening requires brutal honesty. You must be willing to ask, is this actually discernment? Or is this fear wearing the mask of wisdom? Is this a boundary? Or is this avoidance? Is this intuition? Or is this trauma recognizing a familiar wound? The mind doesn't like these questions because they threaten the rulers inside it. Every false pattern wants to remain unconscious because a pattern loses its power the moment it's clearly seen. That's why awareness is dangerous to the illusion. The soul doesn't need to violently escape the mind. It needs to stop being hypnotized by it. The mind itself is not evil. It's a tool. But when the mind is ruled by fear, shame, and distortion, it becomes a false kingdom. It becomes the inner empire where the soul is forced to bow before the old programming. The true work is not to destroy the mind. The true work is to dethrone the false rulers. There comes a threshold where the soul begins to notice the loop. At first, it feels like discomfort. You react the same way, but something within watches it happen. You fall into the same fear, but something within knows this isn't the whole truth. You repeat the same inner collapse, but now there is a witness inside of you that doesn't believe the full story anymore. That witness is sacred. That witness is the beginning of liberation. The false pattern may still move through you, but you are no longer completely fused with it. This is the crack in the archonic spell. The moment you can say, a pattern is arising in me, instead of, this is who I am, space appears. And in that space, the soul begins to breathe. This is why awakening is often uncomfortable. Because the first stage of freedom is not bliss. It's recognition. You begin to see how much of your life has been lived from inherited fear, social programming, and unconscious repetition. That can be painful. But this pain is divine. It is the pain of the false self losing its throne. The revelation isn't, I have been broken. The revelation is, I have been identifying with what was never truly me. You are not your fear. You are not your trauma response. You are not the voice that tells you nothing will ever change. Those things may be moving through your field, but they are not the essence of your being. The divine spark was never destroyed. It was covered, conditioned, and buried beneath patterns that repeated so long they began to feel eternal. But no false pattern is eternal. Only truth is eternal. And when the soul begins to remember truth, the old rulers begin to tremble. Not because you attacked them, but because you finally stopped worshiping them. So, how does this reflect in your real life? It looks like pausing before you react. It looks like noticing when your mind creates a disaster before anything has even happened. It looks like catching the voice of shame and saying, "I hear you, but you are not my God." This isn't passive. This is spiritual rebellion. The deepest rebellion is not screaming at the world. It is refusing to let unconscious patterns rule your inner kingdom. Because if the false pattern controls your perception, it controls your choices. And if it controls your choices, it controls your life. That is how the soul stays asleep. Not through one dramatic curse, but through repetition. One familiar fear, one unconscious reaction, one old identity reinforced again and again. But the same way repetition can enslave, conscious repetition can liberate. Each time you see the pattern without becoming it, the spell weakens. Each time you choose presence instead of panic, the soul gains ground. Each time you return to the monad, the false rulers lose authority. The archons don't want to destroy you. They want you to believe every thought. They want you to obey every fear. They want you to confuse conditioning with destiny. They want you to call the cage home. But the soul was not created to sleep forever. Something within you knows when a pattern is false, even if that pattern has been with you for years. Something within you knows when shame is pretending to be humility. That knowing is the light returning to your being. Don't underestimate the power of seeing clearly. Clear seeing is the sword that cuts through the illusion. You don't have to defeat every pattern in one day. You only have to stop calling the pattern your true nature. Because you are not the prison. You are the light becoming conscious inside of it. And once the soul remembers that, the old rulers can no longer hold the throne. You can get the thing you work so hard to reach, and still feel empty when it arrives. And that emptiness doesn't mean you're broken. It may mean that something deeper within you is tired of being fed substitutes. There is a strange pain that comes when you finally get something you thought would change everything, and it still doesn't touch the place inside you that feels empty. You thought the relationship would do it. You thought the money would do it. You thought the achievement, the new beginning, or the spiritual breakthrough would finally make you feel complete. And for a moment, maybe it did. For a moment there was a rush. There was excitement. There was relief. There was the feeling that life was finally moving in the right direction. You could breathe for a second, because the thing you were reaching for was no longer out there in the distance. It was in your hands. But then the feeling faded. The excitement became normal. The new thing became familiar. And somewhere inside, the same quiet ache returned. That's when the mind starts searching again. It says, maybe this wasn't enough because I need something bigger. Maybe I need more money. Maybe I need a better relationship. Maybe I just haven't found the right thing yet. So the chase begins. You start believing that peace is just one more accomplishment away, that fulfillment is waiting behind the next door, and the reason you still feel empty is because you haven't achieved enough. But that couldn't be farther from the truth, because the mind is very good at moving the finish line. It tells you that once you get there, you can finally rest. But the moment you get there, it quietly just creates another there, another problem to solve, another image to maintain, another future version of you that seems more worthy of peace than the person you are right now. And before long, life becomes a constant negotiation with emptiness. You're not living. You're bargaining. You're saying, I will feel whole once this changes. I will feel safe once this happens. I will feel loved once they approve of me. But the more you chase completion through material things, the more exhausted your soul becomes. Because the soul knows when it is being offered substitutes. What's actually happening isn't that life has failed you. It's not that desire is wrong. It's not that wanting love, success, and stability is some kind of spiritual mistake. There's nothing wrong with wanting a better life. There's nothing wrong with that at all. The problem begins when temporary things are asked to give you permanent peace. You're trying to make something outside of you do the work of something deeper within. You're asking a relationship to give you an identity, success to give you worth, and attention to give you love. You're asking money to give you safety beyond fear, achievement to silence shame, and pleasure to cover pain. You are asking spiritual information to replace direct contact with God, presence, and truth. And for a while, these things can distract you. They can stimulate you. They can make you feel alive. But they cannot become the foundation of your being. That's why the emptiness keeps returning. Not because you're ungrateful, weak, or impossible to satisfy, but because something within you knows the difference between stimulation and fulfillment. Stimulation comes and goes. Fulfillment has roots. Stimulation gives you a momentary high. Fulfillment gives you a place to stand. Stimulation says, I want more. Fulfillment says, everything I need is right here. And most people are living in a world that constantly trains them to choose stimulation over fulfillment. Everything around you whispers that the next thing will fix the ache. But the ache is not always asking for an upgrade. Sometimes the ache is asking for honesty. Sometimes it's asking you to stop pretending that the thing you were chasing can bring you salvation. Because that's what happens. Without realizing it, the mind turns certain things into saviors. It says, if they love me, I will be whole. If I become successful, I will finally matter. If my life looks the way I imagined, then I will finally feel peace. But anything you turn into a savior also becomes your master. Because now your peace depends on it. Now your identity depends on it. Now your sense of worth rises and falls with something unstable. And when that thing cannot carry the weight of your soul, you're disappointed. But sometimes disappointment isn't failure. Sometimes it's revelation. It reveals where you handed your inner authority to something that was never meant to hold it. It reveals where you confused relief with peace. It reveals where you made the external world responsible for an inner hunger it could never satisfy. This is why nothing feels like enough. Because the hunger is deeper than the object. You don't just want more. You want meaning. You want rest. You want contact with something real enough that doesn't disappear the moment circumstances change. That's not a material hunger. That's a spiritual hunger. And spiritual hunger cannot be fed by endless material consumption. So what should you do about it? You don't begin by hating desire. You don't begin by pretending you no longer want anything. That just becomes another mask. You begin by telling the truth about what you've been asking those things to do for you. You look at the thing you keep chasing and ask, what am I hoping this will give me? Not on the surface, but deeper. If you're chasing approval, maybe you're really seeking permission to exist without shame. If you're chasing success, maybe you're really seeking proof that your life has value. If you're chasing control, maybe you're really seeking safety. If you're chasing constant spiritual answers, maybe you're really trying to avoid the silence where surrender begins. Once you see the deeper hunger, you can stop worshiping the substitute and stop asking these things to complete you. It's that simple. You stop saying, "This must save me," and you start saying, "This can be a part of my life, but it cannot be the source of my being." That's where true freedom begins. Because the moment something no longer is your savior, you can finally have a healthy relationship with it. You can enjoy success without needing it to prove you are worthy. You can receive love without demanding that the other person heal all of your wounds. You can grow spiritually without turning every insight into another identity to defend. This doesn't make your life smaller. It makes it more honest. Because everything becomes what it actually is. A relationship becomes a relationship, not a rescue mission. Money becomes a tool, not a god. Success becomes an expression, not an identity. And life becomes something you are present for, not something you are constantly trying to use as proof that you're enough. The emptiness begins to change when you stop running from it, because emptiness is often painful when it is filled with noise instead of understanding. Sometimes the hollow place within you isn't a hole to be stuffed. Sometimes it's a doorway. It's the place where the false promises of the world stop working. It's the place where the mind finally admits, I cannot keep feeding myself with things that cannot nourish me. It's the place where God is no longer treated as an emergency button, but as the living essence of your being. And when that happens, you may still have human needs, human dreams, and human desires. But desperation fades away, because you are no longer trying to force the world to give you what only truth can give you. You are no longer trying to make temporary things provide eternal peace. You are no longer confusing movement with meaning. Nothing feels like enough when the soul is starving for what is real. And this is why more does not always heal the emptiness. Because the emptiness was never about what you lacked. It was about what you were disconnected from. You were disconnected from presence. Disconnected from truth. Disconnected from the quiet place within you that doesn't need to become more before it can be whole. And the mind hates this, because the mind survives through the next chase. But the soul does not awaken through endless chasing. The soul awakens when it finally sees what the chase was trying to cover. The ache is not your enemy. The ache is the part of you that refuses to be satisfied by illusion. The emptiness is not proof that your life is meaningless. It's proof that you are made of something deeper than constant stimulation. Nothing feels like enough because you were never meant to be completed by material things. You are meant to remember what can never be taken from you. There's a reason peace can feel strange when you spent years surviving chaos. Your conscious mind may say, "I want better," but your subconscious may be whispering, "Pain is familiar, change is unknown, and familiar feels safe." This is one of the most difficult aspects of your inner world. The subconscious doesn't always choose what's good for you. It chooses what it recognizes. It chooses what your nervous system has rehearsed. It chooses the emotional environment that once helped you to survive, even if that same environment is now slowly destroying your peace. So when you keep returning to the same kind of relationship, the same kind of disappointment, the same emotional pattern, it's not because you're weak. It may be because part of you still believes that the old pain feels like home. And until that part of you is seen, loved, and reprogrammed, your life will keep trying to recreate the wound in the name of safety. One of the most confusing parts of healing is realizing that you can want peace and still resist it. You can want love and still feel uncomfortable when someone treats you gently. You can want success and still sabotage yourself when life begins to open up. You can want freedom and still feel pulled back toward the old prison, because the prison is painful, but at least your nervous system knows the walls. That's the conflict. Part of you wants expansion. Another part of you wants familiarity. And the subconscious doesn't measure safety the way your higher awareness does. It doesn't ask, "Is this healthy?" It asks, "Have I been here before? Do I know how to survive this?" That's why old pain can feel more comfortable than new peace. Not because pain is good, but because pain has become predictable. At some point in your life, your nervous system learned a language. Maybe it learned that love comes with tension, or that relationships lead to abandonment. Or perhaps it learned that peace never lasts, so you should stay guarded, even when nothing's wrong. The survival self forms around those lessons. It watches, it adapts, it creates emotional strategies to keep you from being hurt again. But the survival self isn't the same as the true self. The survival self is the version of you that learned how to function inside pain. It learned how to read moods, anticipate rejection, or shrink before someone else can make you feel small. And because it helped you to survive, part of you still trusts it. That's the painful part. The pattern protected you at one time. But what protected you in an unsafe environment can become the very thing that blocks a brighter future. The armor that helped you survive the battlefield becomes too heavy when you finally reach open ground. The deepest shift happens when you realize the subconscious doesn't confuse pain with safety because it wants you to suffer. It confuses pain with safety because pain is well known. Your body knows the tension. Your emotions know the pain. Your mind knows the story. This is why a peaceful relationship can feel unfulfilling. This is why emotional consistency can feel like something's missing. This is why a calm season of life can make you feel anxious, as if your system is waiting for the next disaster to prove that the old worldview was right. But peace isn't the problem. The problem is that your system hasn't learned how to trust it yet. It's learned how to survive intensity. It's learned how to bond through uncertainty. It's learned how to confuse emotional intensity with connection. So when life finally becomes quieter, the old self may panic and say, "Something's wrong." But nothing may be wrong. You may simply be detoxing from chaos. And on a deeper level, this isn't just psychological. It's spiritual. Because every pattern is also a veil. Every unconscious wound becomes a lens through which you see yourself. When the wound is active, You don't see reality clearly. You see reality through the expectation of harm. You may look at love and see danger. You may look at rest and see laziness. You may look at abundance and see the possibility of losing everything. The old program becomes a false interpreter. It stands between consciousness and truth. But your deeper self was never born from that wound. Your soul isn't the trauma pattern. Your awareness isn't the survival script. The light within you isn't damaged because the mind learned to be afraid. Source isn't asking you to stay loyal to the environment that hurt you. Source is calling you back into alignment with what was always deeper than the wound. And here's the truth that most people don't want to face. Sometimes the pain continues because part of you keeps choosing what confirms your old identity. If you've always felt unwanted, you may feel drawn to people who make you prove your worth. If you've always felt unsafe, you may mistake emotional intensity for passion. If you've always had to earn love, you may feel uncomfortable receiving love freely. That doesn't mean that you're broken. It means the subconscious is trying to complete an old story by recreating the same emotional stage and hoping this time the ending will change. Healing happens when you stop sabotaging your future with the wounds of your past. At some point, you have to stop asking the old pain for permission to move on. When peace feels unfamiliar, don't immediately run back to chaos. Pause and name what's happening. My system isn't in danger. My system is adjusting to something new. When someone treats you with steadiness, don't confuse the absence of anxiety with the absence of chemistry. When life gets quiet, don't create a problem just to feel normal again. You're teaching your subconscious a new truth. Safety doesn't have to feel intense. Love doesn't have to feel uncertain. Peace doesn't have to be earned through suffering. This takes repetition. You can't shame the survival self into surrendering. You have to show it, again and again, that the new life won't destroy you. Every time you choose stillness instead of reaction, you're teaching the body. Every time you stay present instead of returning to the old loop, you're teaching the mind. Every time you let peace remain without sabotaging it, you're teaching the subconscious that home can feel different now. Some people don't suffer because they're weak. They suffer because they feel what others bury. They notice what others ignore. They sense the shift in someone's voice, the distance in someone's eyes, the hidden pain beneath a smile, and the quiet dishonesty behind words that sound perfectly normal. And when you're built this way, life doesn't just hit you on the surface. It goes deep. A small rejection can open an old wound. A simple disappointment can feel like proof that nothing is safe. A quiet season can make you question your entire existence. And after a while, you may start wondering, why do I suffer so much? Why can't I just let things go like everyone else? But the real question isn't why you feel so deeply. The real question is, have you mistaken your depth for a life sentence of pain? When you suffer deeply, the first conclusion is usually personal. You start thinking something is wrong with you. You think you're too emotional, too sensitive, too much for other people, and maybe even too much for yourself. You watch other people move through life with what looks like ease. They get hurt, but they seem to bounce back faster. They get disappointed, but they don't seem to spiral the same way. They lose people, change jobs, go through conflict, and somehow they keep functioning like their entire world didn't just collapse. And then there you are, feeling everything in layers. You don't just feel sadness. You feel the meaning behind sadness. You don't just feel rejection. You feel like you were never truly chosen, wanted, or understood. You don't just experience a painful moment. You enter the whole emotional world beneath it. So you start judging yourself. You tell yourself you need thicker skin. You tell yourself you need to stop caring. You tell yourself you need to stop expecting people to understand you. And sometimes, to protect yourself, you may even build an identity around your suffering. You may start thinking, I suffer because I am deeper than everyone else. And there may be some truth in that. But here's the part that you need to understand. Pain does not automatically make you wise. Suffering does not automatically mean you are spiritually advanced. Being wounded does not make you better than people who seem to go through life with ease. The depth is real, but depth can become distorted when pain becomes your proof of identity. Because sometimes the deepest souls suffer the most, not because they're meant to suffer, but because they haven't learned how to stop turning every wound into a mirror of who they are. This is where you must be careful. You feel pain, then you identify with the pain. You feel abandoned, then you become the abandoned one. You feel misunderstood, then you become the one who no one understands. You feel rejected, then you become the one who always gets left behind. And once pain becomes identity, healing can start to feel like betrayal. Because who are you without the wound? Who are you without the ache? Who are you without the story that explains why you feel so sad? That's why this conversation matters. Because your suffering may be real. Your sensitivity may be real. Your depth is definitely real. But none of those things mean you're supposed to live trapped inside pain forever. What's actually happening is deeper than you're too sensitive. A deep soul often suffers because it processes life on more than one level. You are not only reacting to what happened, you are reacting to what it means. You are reacting to what it reminds you of. You are reacting to the emotional pattern underneath the event. That is why something small can feel enormous. Someone takes too long to respond, and your mind doesn't just say, they're busy. It says, I'm not important. Someone's tone changes slightly, and your body doesn't only say, they sound tired. It says, something is wrong. I need to get ready for conflict. Someone pulls away, and your nervous system doesn't just say, they need space. It says, I'm about to be abandoned again. That's not weakness. That's pattern recognition mixed with old pain. Many deep souls were not born into suffering. They were trained into hyper-awareness. They had to read rooms. They had to notice moods. They had to sense danger before danger became obvious. They had to become emotionally intelligent before they were emotionally protected. So now, as adults, they call it intuition, when sometimes it's actually a nervous system that never learned how to be safe. That doesn't mean your intuition is fake. It means your intuition and your fear may be speaking at the same time. And your work is to learn the difference. because a deep soul can feel truth, but a wounded soul can also mistake fear for truth. This is why you may keep attracting pain, not because you want to suffer, but because your inner system is still searching for familiar emotional patterns. If chaos was familiar, peace may feel suspicious. If rejection was familiar, healthy love may feel boring. If emotional intensity was familiar, calmness may feel empty. If being misunderstood was familiar, being seen may feel uncomfortable. And this is the brutal truth. Sometimes deep souls suffer because they are loyal to emotional climates they have outgrown. They keep returning to people, places, and versions of themselves that hurt, not because they're stupid, but because the body confuses familiar pain with safety. This is why healing isn't just about thinking better thoughts. Healing is teaching your whole system that peace isn't dangerous. Love doesn't have to feel like anxiety. Connection doesn't have to feel like proving that you're worthy. And depth doesn't have to feel like suffering. The deepest souls often suffer because they can see underneath the surface, but they have not always learned how to live above the wound. They can understand everyone else's pain, but ignore their own. They can forgive people who hurt them, but struggle to protect themselves from being hurt again. They can carry compassion for others, but mistake self-abandonment for love. And this is where depth becomes dangerous. Not because depth is bad, but because depth without boundaries becomes a doorway for exhaustion. Depth without grounding becomes overthinking. Depth without self-respect becomes martyrdom. Depth without healing becomes identity. So the goal is not to become shallow. The goal is to go deep without drowning. The first step is to stop romanticizing your suffering. That may sound harsh, but it's necessary. There is a strange comfort in pain when pain has been with you for a long time. It becomes familiar. It becomes explainable. It becomes a language you know how to speak. And sometimes, without even realizing it, you keep choosing the wound because the wound gives you an identity. The misunderstood one. The abandoned one. The empath. The one who always sees what no one else sees. But your soul did not come here just to be beautifully wounded. You are not here to turn pain into poetry while your life suffers. You are not here to be spiritually aware, but emotionally imprisoned. You are not here to understand everyone else, while abandoning yourself in the process. So moving differently begins with honesty. When pain rises, ask yourself, is this what is actually happening? Or is this what I am afraid is happening again? That question can disrupt the old identity, because much of your suffering is not only in the present moment. It is the present moment touching an old emotional wound. And when that old wound opens, your body may react as if the past has returned. This is where awareness becomes powerful. Not the kind of power that controls everything. The kind of power that pauses before obeying the pattern. You don't have to answer every emotion immediately. You don't have to believe every fear. You don't have to turn every uncomfortable silence into a story about your worth. You don't have to chase people just because distance activated an old wound. You don't have to explain yourself endlessly to people committed to misunderstanding you. And you don't have to keep proving that you're worthy of love by tolerating what keeps breaking your peace. This is where the deepest souls begin to heal. Not when they stop feeling, but when they stop worshiping every feeling as absolute truth. Because feelings are real, but they're not always final. Pain is real, but it's not always prophecy. Fear is real, but it's not always guidance. Loneliness is real, but it's not proof that you're unlovable. The deep soul must learn discernment. You can be compassionate and still have boundaries. You can understand why someone acts the way they do and still not let them close enough to harm you. You can love deeply and still leave. You can forgive someone and still refuse to rebuild a bridge back to the same chaotic relationship. You can be spiritual and still be direct. You can be kind and still say no. This is the new path. Depth with boundaries. Sensitivity with discernment. Love with self-respect. And maybe the most important shift of all, you have to stop believing that peace means you have become less deep. Some deep souls are addicted to intensity because intensity feels meaningful. But peace is not empty. Peace is what depth feels like when it is no longer at war with itself. Peace may feel unfamiliar at first. It may feel quiet. It may feel almost suspicious. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. It means your system is learning a new language. A language where love doesn't require panic. A language where purpose doesn't require suffering. A language where growth doesn't require constant collapse. A language where you can feel deeply without being destroyed by what you feel. That's maturity. That's healing. That's the deeper soul becoming whole. So, if you have suffered deeply, don't use that pain as proof that something is wrong with you. Don't use it as proof that you are meant to suffer. Your depth is not a curse. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. Your awareness is not the enemy. But your depth needs grounding. Your sensitivity needs protection. Your awareness needs direction. Because a deep soul without healing becomes a witness to pain. But a deep soul with healing becomes a presence that transforms the room without needing to bleed for everyone in it. You don't have to become colder. You don't have to become numb. You don't have to stop caring. You just have to stop abandoning yourself in the name of being deep. The deepest souls often suffer the most because they feel life in layers. But the healed soul learns something even greater. You can feel the layer without becoming trapped inside it. You can understand the wound without living from it. You can carry depth without carrying everyone else's darkness as your responsibility. And when that happens, your sensitivity stops being a wound that controls you and becomes a gift that serves you. Not by making you suffer more, but by helping you see clearly, love wisely, and finally choose peace without shame. Letting go sounds peaceful until life asks you to actually do it. It sounds beautiful when it's a quote on a screen. It sounds spiritual when someone says, just surrender your problems to God. But when you are the one being asked to release the thing that you are holding on to, it doesn't always feel like peace. It can feel like death. It can feel like you're losing your grip on the only thing that made you feel safe. And this is why letting go feels so terrifying. Because most of the time, you are not only letting go of a situation, you are letting go of the person you became while trying to control that situation. And that can feel like you're losing yourself. But what if you are not losing yourself? What if you are losing the version of you that was built around fear? There is a very real pain in surrender. People talk about letting go like it's gentle. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it feels like your whole nervous system is fighting against it. You want peace, but you also want certainty. You want freedom, but you also want control. You want God to guide you, but you also want God to explain every detail before you move. And underneath all of that, there is usually a deeper fear. If I let this go, who will I be? Because you may have organized your whole life around this one thing. You may have built your personality around surviving in it. You may have built your prayers around needing it to change. You may have built your identity around proving that one day, everything you suffered through would finally make sense. So when life asks you to release it, the mind panics. Not because the thing itself was always good for you, but because the thing became familiar. And the familiar can feel like home, even when it's hurting you. That is the trap. The mind will confuse familiarity with safety. It will confuse attachment with love. It will confuse control with strength. And when God begins loosening your grip, the ego says, I'm disappearing. But the soul may be saying, finally. The mind creates a false self around what it believes it must keep. If you had to be strong for too long, the mind may create an identity around never needing anyone. If you were rejected, the mind may create an identity around proving your worth. If you were betrayed, the mind may create an identity around never trusting again. If life felt chaotic, the mind may create an identity around controlling every possible outcome before it happens. And eventually, you stop noticing that it's not your true self. It's armor. It's protection. It's a survival pattern that stayed too long. You begin to say, this is just who I am. But is it? Or is it who you had to become in order to survive a season that wounded you? This is where letting go becomes sacred. Because God is not only asking you to release the outer attachment, He is revealing the inner structure that attachment was holding together. The need to be chosen. The need to be right. The need to never feel powerless again. And that is why surrender feels so personal. It's not just let go of the outcome. It's let go of the false self that needed this outcome in order to feel real. That's a much deeper surrender. The mind wants God to be something it can use to preserve the self it already built. But God is not an object the mind can use to keep its illusions intact. God is not here to decorate the prison. God is not here to make fear more comfortable. God is not here to help the false self become more spiritually impressive. Sometimes grace does not come as confirmation. Sometimes grace comes as interruption. Sometimes God does not give you what you are clinging to, because what you are clinging to is keeping you from receiving what is real. And that's hard to accept, because the mind says, if God loved me, He would let me keep this. But the deeper truth may be, because God loves you, He will not let you become permanently identified with what is breaking you. Letting go feels like losing yourself, because the self you are losing was never the deepest you. It was the frightened construction, the defended personality, the anxious manager, the one who believed peace could only come after everything was controlled. But God is not found at the end of perfect control. God is found when control finally becomes too heavy to worship. In the hidden stream of early mystical Gnosticism, there is a deep emphasis on awakening from false identity. The soul forgets where it came from. It becomes entangled in the world of appearances. It mistakes the temporary for the eternal. It mistakes the constructed self for the living truth within. This is the ancient mirror. The problem is not simply that you suffer. The problem is that suffering convinces you to become someone false in order to survive. Then you spend years defending that false self, as if it were your soul. The Nag Hammadi texts often point toward remembrance, not becoming something new in the egoic sense, but remembering what was real before fear named you, before pain shaped you, before the world told you what you had to be. Letting go is painful because it feels like the false name is being stripped away. But beneath that false name, something quieter remains. Something not built from panic. Something not dependent on approval. Something not destroyed by uncertainty. Something that is closer to the truth of you. Not everything you are afraid to lose is meant to stay. And not every version of yourself you're afraid to lose is truly you. Some parts of you are trauma responses with a spiritual vocabulary. Some parts of you are fear patterns dressed up as wisdom. Some parts are control mechanisms pretending to be discernment. And some parts are your old wounds calling themselves personality. That doesn't mean you shame yourself. It just means you become honest. You don't punish the false self. You understand why it formed. You thank it for trying to protect you, but you stop letting it lead your life. Because the false self will always choose the familiar cage over the unknown doorway. It will always say, stay where you know how to survive. But God may be saying, come where you can finally live. And that difference matters. Survival is not the same as life. Control is not the same as peace. Attachment is not the same as love. And the version of you that knows how to endure suffering is not necessarily the version of you that knows how to receive joy. Sometimes, the old self has to loosen because it cannot enter the peace you have been praying for. In real life, this may look very ordinary. It may look like not texting someone again just to prove you still matter. It may look like allowing silence to be silence instead of turning it into a courtroom in your mind. It may look like not forcing an answer when life has not given you one yet. It may look like walking away from the version of yourself that always needed to explain, defend, and perform. Maybe you have been clinging to a relationship because without it, you don't know who you are. Maybe you have been clinging to an old dream because releasing it feels like admitting failure. Maybe you have been clinging to anger because anger gives you identity, direction, and a reason to keep the wound alive. Maybe you have been clinging to anxiety because anxiety makes you feel responsible, even when it is destroying your peace. Letting go does not mean you become passive. It does not mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you let people mistreat you. It means you stop making your identity depend on what you cannot control. You take the next honest step. You breathe. You pray without demanding. You act without obsessing. You grieve without rebuilding your whole identity around the grief. And slowly, you begin to notice something. You're still here, even without the thing you thought you could not lose, even without the answer, even without the role, even without the story you kept repeating. Something remains, and that remaining presence is closer to your real self than the fear ever was. Letting go feels like losing yourself because the ego cannot imagine life beyond the identity it created. But God can. You are not being asked to disappear. You are being invited to stop mistaking armor for essence. You are not losing the truth of who you are. You are losing what fear convinced you to become. And yes, that can hurt. It can feel empty at first. It can feel unfamiliar. It can feel like standing in a room where the old furniture has been removed, and you do not yet know what belongs there. But emptiness is not always abandonment. Sometimes emptiness is space. Space for God. Space for peace. Space for the self that does not need to be held together by fear anymore. So if letting go feels like losing yourself, pause before you panic. Ask yourself, which self am I afraid of losing? The false self built from fear? Or the deeper self that has been waiting underneath it? Because one must loosen for the other to breathe. Your life doesn't keep repeating because you are cursed, broken, or incapable of change. It keeps repeating because some part of you is still emotionally loyal to an old wound. You may want a new life consciously, but if your nervous system is still familiar with the old wound, it will keep pulling you back into the same emotional classroom. Most people think that if they have to repeat something, it means they have failed. They look at the same relationship pattern, the same emotional trigger, the same disappointment, and they say, "Why does this keep happening to me?" But the deeper question is not, why does this keep happening? The deeper question is, what emotion inside of me still believes this is where I belong? Because life does not only repeat through events, it repeats through emotional states. You may leave one situation and walk into another with different names, different faces, different places, but somehow the emotional feeling is the same. The same feeling of abandonment. The same pressure to prove yourself. The same fear of being misunderstood. The same need to earn love. That's the subconscious mirror. It doesn't show you what you want. It shows you what isn't healed yet. This is why someone can swear they are done with toxic people, then keep choosing people who activate the same wound. This is why someone can leave a chaotic home, build an adult life, and still feel unsafe when things are calm. This is why someone can receive kindness and still distrust it, because a part of them is waiting for the hidden cost. The pattern is not proof that you are weak. It's proof that something inside of you is still asking to be seen. Your conscious mind wants something better. It wants peace, love, and success. It wants a life that finally feels safe. But the subconscious doesn't chase what is better. The subconscious moves toward what is familiar. And that's where most people go wrong. If chaos was familiar, peace can feel suspicious. If emotional distance was familiar, healthy love can feel overwhelming. If criticism was familiar, then praise can't be trusted. If chaos shaped your early life, Peace may not feel peaceful. It may feel like danger. Because your system learned to scan the room, predict the moods, and survive the emotional weather of other people. So when life becomes quiet, the old programming whispers, something is wrong. And if you don't understand this, you may create a problem just to return to a feeling your nervous system recognizes. It's not because you want pain. It's because the unhealed part of you mistakes familiarity with safety. This is the pattern of repetition. You are not always choosing the person, the habit, or the conflict. Sometimes you are choosing the emotional atmosphere that matches your old identity. You are choosing the feeling of chasing, the feeling of being almost chosen, the feeling of being needed but not loved, the feeling of proving your worth to someone who can't even see it. And until that emotion is healed, your life will keep rearranging itself around the wound. Not to punish you, but to let you see where you are still holding on to pain. Healing doesn't begin when you hate the pattern. It begins when you stop identifying with it. There's a major difference between saying, "This keeps happening because this is who I am," and saying, "This keeps happening because there is an emotion within me that has not been met with awareness." One statement traps you. The other opens the door. Because the moment you stop making the pattern your identity, you can finally see it as programming. Not destiny. Not your personality. Not proof that you're doomed. But programming. And programming can be witnessed. It can be questioned. It can be interrupted. The old emotional pattern may say, "You need to chase them." But awareness says, "No. This is the wound that thinks love must be earned." The old pattern may say, "You need to explain yourself until they understand." But awareness says, "No. This is my inner child trying to be safe by being perfectly understood." The old pattern may say, "I'm bored with this relationship. There isn't enough passion." But awareness says, "No. This is my nervous system confusing intensity with connection." That's how the pattern begins to lose authority. Not through force, but through recognition. You don't heal by attacking the wounded part of yourself. You heal by no longer letting that wounded part sit on the throne of your life. This is where source begins to feel less like a concept and more like inner peace. Because beneath the emotional programming, there is a deeper self that was never broken by what happened. It may have been covered. It may have been buried underneath fear, shame, or survival. But it was never destroyed. The deeper self does not need to repeat the wound to understand it. It only needs enough awareness to stop identifying with it. The life you want may feel unfamiliar at first. That doesn't mean you're going in the wrong direction. It may feel strange to be loved without conditions. It may feel strange to be at peace without expecting a disaster. It may feel strange to choose differently when the old version of you is begging you to stay loyal to your old wound. But unfamiliar doesn't mean unsafe. Sometimes, unfamiliar means freedom. So, when the old pattern rises again, don't immediately collapse into shame. Pause Look at it closely. Ask yourself, what emotion is trying to resurface right now? Because the moment you can see the pattern without repeating it, you are no longer trapped in the loop. You're standing at the threshold of a different life. Your life is not repeating because the world is against you. It is repeating because awareness is trying to bring an unhealed emotion into the light. And once that emotion is seen clearly, felt honestly, and no longer obeyed blindly, the repetition begins to lose its power. The same lesson doesn't need to keep arriving in different disguises. The same pain doesn't need to keep wearing new faces. The same wound doesn't need to keep choosing your future. You are allowed to outgrow the emotional atmosphere that once taught you how to survive. You are allowed to become unfamiliar to your old pain. You are allowed to let peace become the new place your nervous system recognizes as home. An empath doesn't usually lose people by walking away. An empath loses people by finally telling the truth without holding back. For years, you may have explained yourself because you thought if someone could understand your heart, they would stop hurting you. You explained your boundaries. You explained why something mattered. You explained why their words affected you. And somewhere along the way, explaining became your prison. Because the wrong people don't need more information. They need you to be confused. They need you to stay soft. They need your guilt to keep negotiating. They need your compassion to keep translating disrespect into misunderstanding. But oftentimes something changes. One day, the empath stops explaining. It's not because they stopped caring. It's because they finally realized that peace doesn't require a courtroom defense. When the empath stops explaining, everything changes. At first, you might think the problem is lack of communication. You may think, maybe I didn't say it clearly enough. Maybe they misunderstood me. Maybe if I explain my intention, they'll finally see that I wasn't trying to hurt them. So you keep giving people access to your inner world. You keep opening doors inside yourself that should have stayed protected. You explain why you reacted the way that you did. You tell them what triggered you. You tell them what you meant to say. You tell them what you need from them. But some people aren't listening to understand you. They're listening to find a place where your boundaries can be weakened. That's hard for an empath to accept because the empath often assumes everyone is operating from the same emotional honesty. You know what it feels like to care. You know what it feels like to reflect on your own actions. You know what it feels like to feel bad when you hurt someone else. So when someone keeps dismissing you, twisting your words, or making you feel guilty for having feelings, your first instinct isn't always to leave. In fact, it's hardly ever that. Your first instinct is to explain harder. You believe that clarity will create peace. But with the wrong person, clarity only gives them more material to use against you. And this is where the empath begins to suffer. They're not weak. They're trying to bring emotional sincerity into a place where emotional sincerity isn't being honored. If this is already speaking to something you have lived, like this video and subscribe, because this is where the shift begins. What's actually happening is deeper than communication. You're not just explaining yourself. You're trying to prove that your pain is valid. You're trying to convince someone that your boundary is reasonable. You're trying to make someone care about the impact they had on you. You're trying to earn basic respect from a person who benefits when you doubt yourself. And that's the trap. Because every time you over-explain to someone who has already decided not to understand you, you abandon yourself a little more. You send a message to your own nervous system that says, "My truth isn't enough unless someone else approves of it." That's why this pattern becomes so exhausting. It isn't just the conversation that drains you. It's the self-betrayal underneath it. The empath often becomes addicted to resolution. They don't love drama, but unresolved tension feels unsafe. Silence feels like rejection. Disapproval feels like danger. Someone misunderstanding you can feel like an emergency, so you rush to fix the emotional field. You apologize for things you didn't even do. You soften truth that needs to stay firm. You explain boundaries that should have only needed to be stated once. But healing begins when you realize your peace isn't dependent on being understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. That one realization changes everything, because now you stop treating every conflict like a wound you must personally repair. You stop walking into every emotional courtroom with evidence, testimony, and a trembling heart. When the empath stops explaining, they don't become cold. They become clear. There's a difference. When someone is cold, they say, "I don't care what happens to you." Someone who speaks with clarity says, "I care, but I won't abandon myself just to make you feel comfortable." This is the way. You say the truth once. You state the boundary clearly. You let your actions carry the weight your explanations used to carry. That means when someone keeps crossing the line, you don't deliver another emotional essay. You adjust access. When someone keeps twisting your words, you don't keep defending your heart. You stop handing them your heart as evidence. When someone keeps demanding explanations but never changes their behavior, you recognize the pattern and you break it. Because explanation without transformation is just another loop, and loops are exhausting. The old version of you may feel guilty for doing this. That old version may whisper, "But what if they think I'm being rude? What if they think I don't care about them? What if they misunderstood what happened entirely?" Let them think whatever they want to think. That's not your problem. It's easier said than done, but it must be done. That's one of the hardest initiations for an empath. Let people misunderstand you when understanding you requires you to portray yourself. Let them think whatever they want to think. Let them tell the story from their own level of consciousness. You don't need to chase every false version of you that exists in someone else's mind. Your energy isn't meant to be spent correcting every distorted reflection. It's meant to be spent living in alignment with what you know is true. And when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, something powerful will happen. You'll hear yourself again. You'll feel your nervous system calm down. You'll begin to recognize how much of your life was being wasted managing other people's reactions. You'll begin to understand that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the absence of self-abandonment. And that's when everything changes. Everyone won't suddenly treat you better, but you will stop negotiating with people who require you to shrink before they will respect you. An empath doesn't stop explaining because their heart is closed. The empath stops explaining because their soul finally learned the difference between love and overextension. You can care without chasing. You can love without begging. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can be kind without making yourself available to confusion, manipulation, or disrespect. And the moment you stop trying to be understood by people who benefit from your self-doubt, your energy returns to you. Your voice returns to you. Your life returns to you. Have you ever noticed that when you finally find peace, some people around you suddenly find a problem. When you stop reacting, they call you distant. When you stop explaining, they call you arrogant. When you stop carrying the old energy, they say you've changed. And maybe you have. Because a lower energy cannot always understand a higher frequency. Guilt misunderstands peace. Apathy misunderstands joy. Pride misunderstands neutrality. But lower consciousness isn't the enemy of higher consciousness. It is the same light seen through a darker veil. This is why some people cannot understand your peace, your boundaries, or your point of view. It isn't that you're better than them. It's that consciousness can only recognize what has already awakened within itself. The scale of consciousness isn't a ladder for the ego. It isn't a way to look down on others, a spiritual ranking system, or another way to divide humanity. It isn't permission to become cold, detached, or superior. The moment the ego uses consciousness to feel superior to someone else, it has already fallen back into the frequency it claims to have transcended. Higher consciousness doesn't make you better than them. It's only that you are seeing more than them. Because the higher you rise inwardly, the more clearly you see that every person is moving through reality from the level they can currently perceive. Someone living in fear will not understand trust. Someone living in shame won't understand self-respect. And it's impossible for someone living in control to understand surrender. They may hear the words, they may see the behavior, but they can't fully recognize the frequency behind it. Because consciousness doesn't understand by information alone. It understands by resonance. And resonance requires an inner match. This is why peace often gets misread. When you stop reacting, you can be seen as cold. When you stop explaining, someone may call you arrogant. When you stop chasing, you may be accused of being selfish. And when you stop participating in old patterns, someone may say you've changed. And they're right. You did change. But what they're feeling isn't your wrongdoing. Sometimes they're just feeling the absence of your old compliance. Lower energies often depend on predictable reactions. They need your guilt. They need your defensiveness. They need your emotional participation. So when your consciousness rises, the people around you get disturbed. Not because you attack them, but because you stop feeding their lower energy. A higher frequency naturally exposes what can't rise with it. Not as punishment, but as revelation. When light enters a dark room, it doesn't hate the darkness. It simply reveals what the darkness was hiding. And when awareness enters an unconscious pattern, it does the exact same thing. It reveals the manipulation. It reveals the fear. It reveals the places where love was mixed with control, where loyalty was confused with self-betrayal, where peace was treated like disobedience. This is why lower energies often resist higher frequencies, because higher frequencies threaten the survival of the old identity. Notice as you hear these words, does your chest tighten or does it expand? That sensation is your internal frequency responding to the truth. If you feel a click of recognition, that's the monad calling you into higher consciousness. In the deeper mystical traditions, reality isn't only physical. It's vibrational. It's mental. It's spiritual. It is a layered world of different frequencies. The visible world is only the outer garment of unseen states of consciousness. This is why two people can experience the same moment and live in completely different worlds. One person sees a locked door and feels defeated. Another sees the same locked door and realizes They no longer belong in that room anyway. The event may be the same, but the consciousness interpreting it is different. You don't merely experience reality. You experience reality through the state of consciousness you occupy. The Gnostics understood this through the language of veils, shadows, and false perception. The archons were not only external powers, they were also patterns of distortion within the human mind. The archons don't need to lock you in a cell if they can convince you to view the world through a veil of fear. When you rise in consciousness, you aren't escaping a place. You're dissolving a distortion. Shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, and pride. They all become veils that distort reality. The soul doesn't see what it is. It sees what the veil allows it to see. The archons don't need to build a physical prison if they can keep you vibrating at a lower frequency. They don't even need to block your path. They simply cloud your vision so you stop walking it. So when consciousness rises, it's not simply becoming more positive. It's becoming less distorted. It's seeing through the veils of illusion. And the more veils you see through, the less you can pretend to be something you are not. This path can be lonely, because once you begin seeing clearly, you can't return to your old way of life. You can't keep laughing at what degrades your soul. You can't keep calling chaos passionate love. You can't keep calling control safety. Something within begins to resist. So listen to that resistance. It isn't your enemy. It's your compass. The soul simply cannot bow to lower frequencies anymore. And if this transmission is speaking to something within, take a breath and press like as a frequency check. A signal that your soul recognizes the truth that you are the monad. Saying I am the monad isn't an ego statement. It's a frequency alignment. It's the soul reclaiming its original blueprint. The true test of higher consciousness isn't whether you can sense energy. It's whether you can remain clear without becoming cruel. Because when you begin to see through people, there's a temptation to judge them. You see their fear before they can admit it. You see their manipulation before they try to take advantage of you. You see their wounds speaking through their personality. You may even see the entire pattern behind their performance. But higher consciousness isn't meant to be an ability that is used to expose everyone. It is meant to be the ability to see clearly without losing compassion. The beauty of higher consciousness isn't the power to see through others. It's the freedom of no longer needing them to see through you. This doesn't mean that you stay available to everything or everyone. Compassion doesn't mean automatic access. Understanding doesn't mean instant agreement. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the same old pattern. A higher frequency can love from a distance. It can bless without participation. It can understand without giving up boundaries. Spiritual maturity means that you don't have to prove that you are awake. It doesn't need to debate with those who are committed to misunderstanding you. It doesn't need to drag another soul into a frequency it hasn't chosen yet. You can't force someone to meet you in higher consciousness. You can only embody it. Your peace becomes the school. Your restraint becomes the class. Your boundary becomes the lesson. Not everyone will understand it, but those who are ready will feel it. Because a higher frequency doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. It reveals itself through presence. The lower energies cannot understand higher frequencies because they are not speaking from the same inner world. Fear cannot understand peace until fear begins to soften. Shame cannot understand worth until shame begins to dissolve. Control cannot understand surrender until control stops calling itself safe. And the ego cannot understand the monad, because the monad is what remains when the ego dissolves. This is why your path must become sacred. You can't keep measuring your awakening by who else understands it. Some people will only understand the version of you that they could control. Some will only respect the version of you that abandoned itself. Some will only call you loving when your energy is still available for their manipulation. When consciousness rises, availability changes. You're loving, but you're no longer endlessly accessible. You're compassionate, but you're no longer absorbent. You're still human, but you are no longer allowing people living in lower consciousness to pull you down into their frequency. You now inspire them to meet you at yours. This is the quiet freedom of the soul. You stop trying to translate your light into a language that only distortion can understand. You stop begging lower energies to approve the frequency that lifts you up. You simply become still. You return to source. You remember the monad. You stand in the awareness beneath all noise. And from that place, you don't hate the lower world. You just don't belong to it anymore. If this transmission spoke to your soul, let me know in the comments below. What lower energy are you no longer willing to descend into? I read every comment. If you feel called to support the continued growth of this channel, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/MagnumOpus333. You can also explore some original merchandise at my Teespring store online. The link is in the description below. Or perhaps consider becoming a channel member or sending a super thanks. Every bit of support helps me keep these transmissions coming. Remember, your consciousness is the key that unlocks reality. Let's keep unlocking it together. Thank you for watching. Until next time.